When critics dissected Shedeur Sanders, they leaned heavily on systems and support. Was it the offensive line? Was it play calling? A former NFL QB led the charge, insisting that Sanders stop leaning on context and start taking control. It was a common critique: prove you're the guy, no caveats. So Sanders did exactly that. In a high-pressure game against the Ravens, he owned the moment, not just participating but commanding every phase of the offense. The result was more than a personal win, it was a breakdown of an old narrative. Sanders showed that leadership isn't about fitting into a rigid mold.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
It's about elevating your team in real time. And more importantly, it proved that a quarterback doesn't need to blend in to lead. By embracing who he is, Sanders redefined what readiness and command look like at the NFL level. It was one of those moments where everything stopped. Shedeur Sanders stepped onto the field against the Ravens with more pressure than most rookies face in a season. Not because he'd failed, not because he'd stumbled, but because before he even took a real NFL snap, a former quarterback had already declared him guilty of being too confident. Guilty of believing in himself. Guilty of saying he might be legendary. That was all it took to trigger an avalanche of doubt for media voices and analysts. He's not ready. He needs to stay humble. He hasn't earned the right to talk like that. The takes were loud, fast, and eerily personal. His draft position was used against him. His demeanor was called into question. His preparation was doubted. And yet, when it was time to actually play, Shedeur didn't just respond. He delivered a performance that turned all of that noise into silence. This wasn't a quiet, respectable debut. This was a calculated dismantling of a defense. Every snap, every decision, every throw was delivered with the kind of confidence that isn't manufactured. It's built from years of experience, from work done far from cameras and microphones, from pressure moments where nothing but execution matters. He didn't need to say he was ready. He showed it. And for the former NFL quarterback who called him out, it was an instant regret moment. The kind that replays itself not just in highlight reels but in public opinion. Because when you go that hard with criticism and the person you doubted doesn't just survive but dominates, the L is loud. But the story goes deeper than just one game or one bad take. This wasn't just about proving someone wrong. It was about proving that all the people who bought into the doubt were looking in the wrong places. They weren't asking, can he lead? Does he read the field? Is he tough in the pocket? They were asking, is he too confident? Is he too outspoken? Does he act like he's been handed something he hasn't earned? That's what made this performance so crucial. Shedeur Sanders didn't just check the boxes. He blew up the test. He turned their questions into irrelevant side notes. Because the truth is, everything he was criticized for ended up being part of what made him successful. His confidence? Its composure. His swagger? Its situational awareness disguised. His leadership? It's authentic, because it's his, not borrowed from someone else's mold. The NFL has always had a narrow image of what a quarterback should be. Reserved. Quietly confident. Media-trained. Never too expressive. Never too brash. And if you don't check those boxes, you better be perfect. Because the leash for quarterbacks who don't conform is always shorter. They're held to different standards. Every quote becomes a headline. Every moment of emotion becomes a debate. That's exactly the gauntlet Sanders was dropped into. A fifth-round pick with a famous last name, a bold personality, and a willingness to say he's built for this. For some people, that was enough to write him off. Before he even had a chance to show what he could do. But then he did. And now? Those same commentators, analysts, and critics are stuck in a corner. They can't keep the same energy because the performance was too solid, too composed, too undeniable. And that's where the real issue lies. Because when someone like Shedeur Sanders succeeds, it exposes the system. It shows how many people are willing to bet against a player based on things that have nothing to do with football. Draft status, personality, confidence, culture. It's all wrapped into how quarterbacks are evaluated. And for late-round guys, that evaluation is almost always rooted in skepticism. Sanders wasn't the first fifth-rounder to be doubted, but the weight he carried went far beyond draft boards. The expectation wasn't just to play well, it was to survive the pressure of people wanting him to fail. And he didn't just survive. He thrived. He played like someone who's been there before. Who knows what to do when the pocket collapses, when the coverage disguises, when the blitz is coming. That level of composure? It's not accidental. It doesn't show up in players who aren't ready. That's what the critics missed. The preparation. The mental toughness. The readiness that doesn't need to be shouted about because it shows up when the game starts. The fact that Shedeur had to go above and beyond just to get a fair shot is the core issue here. He had to be perfect to be considered worthy of what other quarterbacks get by default. That's not just an indictment of the media, it's a reflection of how talent is often filtered through bias. And that bias isn't just about draft numbers or stats. It's cultural. It's stylistic. It's about who gets to lead loudly and who's told to sit down and wait. Sanders challenged that. He walked into the NFL as himself, fully. And that made people uncomfortable. But performance changes everything. You can't critique confidence when it comes with execution. You can't dismiss swagger when it results in leadership. You can't call someone a distraction when their teammates rally around them and the results back it all up. And that's exactly what Shedeur did. He didn't just play well, he led. He managed the game. He made plays. He elevated the offense. And when it was over, there wasn't a single clip you could pull to say he didn't belong. There was no, yeah but, available. So where does the conversation go from here? If we're being honest, some media voices will pivot. They'll say he was impressive, but the real test is consistency. They'll shift the goalposts, move the bar, ask for more. And Shedeur? He'll keep doing what he's done, showing up prepared, leading his team and ignoring the noise. Because he's already proven what needed to be proven. The NFL still has work to do when it comes to accepting quarterbacks who don't fit its traditional archetype. But players like Shedeur Sanders are forcing the conversation to evolve. Not by demanding it, but by earning it. He's not trying to be the face of a movement. He's just doing what he's always done, play the game the right way, be himself, and let the rest take care of itself. And now the critics? They don't have much left to say. The tape speaks louder than any tweet. The performance shut down the narrative. And the league just got a reminder that greatness isn't always found in round one. Sometimes it shows up in the fifth, fully formed, fully confident, and fully ready. So let us know, did this game change your view on Sanders? Did he earn the respect the media refused to give him early on? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if you're over the draft bias, and make sure to subscribe. Because if this was just week one, the rest of this season is about to get real interesting. There's a moment, right after the final whistle, right after the scoreboard confirms what you already knew, when everything gets quiet. And that silence? It's not just relief. It's the absence of doubt. That's the moment Shedeur Sanders gave us against the Ravens. All the criticism, all the side comments, all the sly shade from the media, gone. Because when the lights were brightest and the pressure was suffocating, Shedeur didn't just survive. He thrived. He didn't crack. He didn't flinch. He executed. With authority. With control. And with the kind of presence that forces everyone, even the most stubborn critics, to stop talking and start paying attention. And let's not gloss over who he was up against. The Ravens aren't a soft launch for any quarterback, let alone a rookie fifth-rounder. They're physical, smart, experienced. And yet, Shedeur took that challenge and handled it like it was routine. Like he was supposed to be there. Like this wasn't his first time in the fire, it was just the first time the world was watching. That's what made this game such a turning point. Because it didn't just flip the script, it burned the old one. All week long, the talk wasn't about what he could do. It was about whether he should even have the chance. And the loudest voice in that camp? A former NFL quarterback who made it personal. Who questioned Shedeur's mentality. Who made it clear, if you want to call yourself legendary, stop talking and start proving. Well, consider it proved. The irony here is brutal. That former quarterback, speaking from the supposed high ground of experience, told Sanders to stop blaming external factors. His line, his scheme, his receivers, and to take full responsibility for his success or failure. What Shedeur did in response wasn't just about owning his performance. He owned the moment. No excuses. No overcompensation. Just poise and production. It wasn't flashy for the sake of flash. It was efficient. Tactical. Sure. Everything they said he wasn't? He was. And now the question isn't whether he deserves to be in this league, it's why anyone ever doubted it in the first place. Let's get real. The scrutiny Shedeur faced before this game wasn't entirely about football. If it were, we'd have been talking about tape, reads, progressions, footwork. But the conversation was about confidence. About how he carried himself. About his quotes. His presence. His refusal to play small. That's where the real discomfort came from. Because in the NFL, especially for quarterbacks, confidence is only praised when it fits into a very specific mold. Controlled. measured, modest. Any deviation from that, especially when it comes from someone young, vocal, and unapologetically authentic, gets labeled as arrogance. And the problem isn't just that the label exists. It's that it's applied unevenly. Other quarterbacks are allowed to be loud. They're allowed to be passionate, fiery, emotional. When they get in defenders' faces or slam helmets on the sideline, it's leadership. But when Shedeur shows the same energy, it's a lack of humility, a media distraction. It's treated like a liability. That double standard didn't start this week. But this week, it got exposed. Because when Shedeur played like he did, confident, composed, and in complete control, he didn't just challenge the narrative. He broke it. He didn't win because he toned himself down. He won because he leaned into what makes him different. His confidence wasn't in the way, it was the way. It's what allowed him to stay centered while the world was questioning him. It's what kept him focused while former pros were telling him to sit down and be quiet. And it's what helped him lead, even when the odds and the expectations were stacked against him. That's the part people miss. Confidence isn't just a personality trait, it's a tool. And for quarterbacks, it's often the difference between panic and poise, between hesitation and execution. What Sanders has is real. It's not performative. It's not forced. It's the kind of self-belief you only get when you've spent years doing the work that nobody sees. And now that work is undeniable. The narrative that draft position defines a player's ceiling? Shedeur smashed that. The idea that confidence must be earned through silence? He disproved it. The assumption that a fifth-round pick should sit, wait, and maybe hope for a chance in a few years? Obliterated. Because he wasn't just given an opportunity, he seized it. And in doing so, he flipped the power dynamic. The media, the analysts, the doubters, they no longer get to frame his story for him. The performance did that. And the best part? He did it without changing who he is. That authenticity, that refusal to morph into someone more palatable for the cameras, is what makes this so significant. Because the NFL doesn't just evaluate skill. It evaluates personality. And too often, that means forcing players to adopt a personality that feels safe to the people in charge. But Shedeur? He's rewriting that standard. By showing that you can be bold and prepared, confident and grounded, outspoken and respected. He's showing that leadership doesn't come from toning yourself down. It comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to back down when people question it. That's what the media missed before this game. They weren't evaluating a quarterback, they were reacting to an image. And now that the performance is here, they have to reevaluate everything. Not just about Shedeur, but about how they treat players like him. Players who aren't afraid to be more than just quiet professionals. Players who show up unapologetically and change the game, not just on the field but around it. So what happens next? The media will shift gears. Some will pivot. Some will hedge. Others will keep moving the goalposts. Let's see what he does in the next few games. Let's see how he handles adversity. And Shedeur? He'll keep doing what he's always done. Show up, lead, and let his play do the talking. Because he knows what it took to get here. And he knows how many people weren't rooting for him. But more importantly, he knows he doesn't need their approval. He never did. This game wasn't the culmination of his journey. It was the start of a new chapter. One where he no longer has to prove he belongs. One where he doesn't need to justify his confidence. One where the results are already speaking louder than the doubts ever could. So if you've been watching this story unfold, now's the time to pay attention. Because this isn't just about one player, it's about a larger shift. A moment where the league is being forced to reckon with its own biases, its own standards, and the way it decides who gets to lead. Shedeur Sanders didn't just play well. He forced that reckoning. And whether they're ready or not, the NFL has to deal with what's next. And if you're still not convinced this was bigger than a breakout game, then you haven't been paying attention. This wasn't just Shedeur Sanders announcing his arrival. It was the moment he forced everyone, media, fans, analysts, former players, to confront something they've gotten comfortable ignoring. The way quarterbacks are packaged and who gets permission to lead. Because Shedeur didn't ask for permission. He showed up with intention. And when the lights came on and the Ravens' defense lined up, he didn't just run an offense. He owned the moment like it belonged to him all along. No panic. No flailing. No deer in the headlights rookie energy. Just execution. Control. Confidence. The exact confidence he was told to tone down. The same self-belief that was criticized as immature suddenly looked like leadership once it resulted in clean drives, accurate reads, and points on the board. And now that he's performed? Suddenly, All those things that were red flags before the game have magically transformed into intangibles. Amazing how that works. Because we've seen this before. Not just in the NFL but across sports. When players come in with swagger, when they're vocal, confident, and don't play the media's game, they get painted as distractions. As if being self-aware is somehow a threat to team dynamics. But what makes this story hit harder is that Shedeur isn't just fighting narrative bias, he's fighting structural bias. The kind that's baked into how leadership looks in the NFL. That leadership historically has been stoic, quiet, corporate. Think necktie energy. And then here comes Shedeur, bold, unfiltered, confident. Not because he's performing for the cameras, but because he knows exactly who he is. And that, for some reason, was unacceptable, until it worked. But let's talk about what actually worked. He didn't get lucky. He didn't rely on broken coverage or defensive miscues. He made the right decisions, managed pressure, and showed situational awareness beyond what's expected of a rookie, especially one who didn't enter the league with first-round pedigree or political protection. The tape doesn't lie. His footwork was crisp. His timing was sharp. His awareness of the pocket, the tempo, the rhythm, it looked like someone who's been preparing for this moment long before the league started paying attention. And that's the part no one seems to want to admit. This wasn't just a one-game fluke. This was the result of work, of experience, of reps. You don't show up that polished unless you've been building toward it for years. The only difference now is that people were finally forced to see it. Because let's be honest, if Shedeur Sanders had come into the league with a quieter personality, or a more familiar image of what a franchise quarterback is supposed to look and sound like, the narrative would have been different from the start. Instead, he had to earn what others are handed. Respect, credibility, even basic benefit of the doubt. He had to outperform not just the defense in front of him, but the perception behind him. And now that he has, the same people who doubted him are shifting the narrative again. He's a great story. Maybe he'll be one of the good ones. He just needs to stay focused. Notice how quickly the language goes from "he doesn't belong" to "let's manage expectations." That pivot isn't analysis, it's damage control. Because no one wants to admit how wrong they were. No one wants to say that they weren't critiquing tape, they were reacting to tone. That their resistance wasn't about football mechanics, it was about discomfort. About being faced with a version of leadership that didn't play by their rules. And Shedeur? He didn't just ignore that pressure. He thrived under it. That's what makes this performance so disruptive. Because it wasn't just good, it was controlled, measured, intentional. It was the kind of performance that isn't fueled by hype, but by preparation. The kind that's earned, not gifted. And in the NFL, that matters. Because the road to credibility for players like Shedeur is twice as long, twice as steep, and always lined with critics waiting to say, "We told you so." But this time, they don't get that chance. Because this wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about showing who he's always been. Someone who knows the game. Who leads from the front. Who doesn't shrink to fit the box someone else built for him. And that's the part the NFL has to deal with now. Because Shedeur Sanders isn't just here to be a surprise success story. He's here to be standard changing. To force the conversation forward. To show that talent, preparation, and confidence don't have to be filtered through tradition to be effective. He didn't need to change himself to succeed. He needed a chance. And when he got it, he didn't blink. So what's the excuse now? You can't keep moving the goalposts when the scoreboard is right there. You can't keep framing his confidence as arrogance when it results in leadership. And you definitely can't pretend this game didn't mean something when everyone watching felt the shift happen in real time. Because that's what this was. A shift. The old narrative, late-round pick, media distraction, too confident for his own good, that's dead. Buried under the weight of actual performance. And in its place is a new reality. Shedeur Sanders isn't just capable. He's ready. And more importantly, he's not asking for respect anymore. He's commanding it. And for the ones who still don't get it, they'll keep talking in circles while the game keeps speaking for him. So if you've been watching closely, you already know, this wasn't just a win over the Ravens. This was a win over the idea that quarterbacks have to become something different to be taken seriously. That they have to fit a mold. That they can't lead until they've been stripped of everything that made them unique. Shedeur just proved the opposite. Leadership isn't about checking boxes. It's about knowing who you are, and showing up when it counts. And that's exactly what he did. So here we are, days removed from the game and people are still scrambling to make sense of it. Because Shedeur Sanders didn't just defy expectations, he exposed them. He exposed how little faith so many had in him, Not because of what he couldn't do, but because of who he refused to be. He didn't downplay his confidence. He didn't shrink his voice. He didn't pretend to be a humble, quiet rookie just to make people more comfortable. He stayed real. And when the opportunity came, he didn't fold under pressure. He flipped it on everyone who doubted him. The truth is, if you were rooting for Shedeur to fail, you weren't rooting for football. You were rooting for an outdated system that rewards quiet compliance over individuality. And when he stepped onto that field and delivered the kind of performance that made every hot take fall flat, it wasn't just about proving his critics wrong, it was about showing exactly why those critics got it wrong in the first place. Because let's be clear, Shedeur isn't an anomaly. He's part of a new generation of players who aren't afraid to lead on their own terms, who won't strip down their personality to fit into someone else's mold, who understand that talent, authenticity, and preparation aren't mutually exclusive, they're the formula. And that's why this game hit so differently. It wasn't just a win. It was a warning. A warning to every analyst, every scout, every commentator still clinging to the idea that confidence should be earned through silence. That quarterbacks have to act a certain way before they're allowed to lead. That draft position is destiny. Shedeur shattered all of that in 4 quarters. Now the question is, will the NFL catch up? Because he's not waiting. He's not here to ask for acceptance. He's here to play, to lead, to redefine what quarterbacking looks like in a league that's been far too slow to evolve. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, good. Because maybe it's time they felt the discomfort that comes with being wrong. The discomfort of watching someone you doubted succeed exactly as they are. Without compromise. Without apology. Shedeur Sanders didn't just win a game, he took control of his story. And whether people want to admit it or not, that story just became one of the most compelling in the league. So let us know, what did you see? Was this performance the start of something bigger? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if you're here for quarterbacks who lead with authenticity, and subscribe to stay locked in. Because the next time someone tells Shedeur Sanders to prove himself, they won't even need to respond. The film already did.